All right, well, hey, it's Rob, and there's my buddy Diego back there. He always wants to join me when I make these videos. Anyway, so I guess I'm just in the mood to do a little bit more content about Michael Jackson and the time I spent working in the studio on the Dangerous project. If you just are stumbling upon my channel for the first time, my name is Rob Disner, and I worked on Michael Jackson's Dangerous record. Well, I shouldn't say I worked on the record. I worked at the studio where the record was being made. I got to be very specific here because I don't ever want to take credit for anything I didn't do. And the things that I did do included getting lunch for the studio engineers, cleaning the studio. Occasionally I got to, set up a couple microphone stands or whatever, but the bulk of my job was called studio runner, which meant when I wasn't there answering phones or cleaning up the studio, I was out driving around somewhere picking up something that, the studio staff or the people working on the record, may need. It could be food. It could be equipment. I mean, once I had to go out and, pick up underwear for Michael Jackson. I mean, it could have really been anything. So, and I've got lots of videos where I talked about all the adventures I had driving around, getting different things for the project. Anyway, but the video today is inspired by a whole other topic, which is the song selection on Dangerous, the actual, collection of songs that finally ended up on Dangerous would change and, morph and, evolve and maybe devolve over the course of this project. And it was, a wildly different list that you would have seen, in 1990 or, the early part of 1991, compared to what actually ended up on Dangerous. And there were lots of twists and turns and things like that. So my inspiration for this video was that there is a video out there, and I've talked about this before, that basically was stolen from the Brad Sundberg archives. Of course, Brad does the In the Studio with MJ seminars all over the world. Matter of fact, he's, I think, in Australia this month or whatever. It's crazy. You can go anywhere on the planet and find an audience of people willing to hear his Michael Jackson stories. Now, he worked with Michael Jackson in a technical capacity, and as an engineer, he did some legitimate work with Michael for, I don't know, close to 20 years or something. So he definitely has some good stories. And if you haven't been to In the Studio with MJ seminar and it comes to your town and you're a big MJ fan, it's not cheap, but it is well worth it. I got to participate in a couple of them. Thankfully, he didn't charge me because I really enjoyed just being a part of it anyway, and I got to tell a few stories and whatever. But he's been in Atlanta a couple times. I think once maybe around the time of COVID, maybe 4 years ago, and then I did one a couple of years ago as well. Anyway, so there is this video that was stolen from a seminar. He had a big, high-profile theft of his, content that he uses in these seminars. A guy came to the seminar and his whole intention was to steal Brad's laptop, which he did. He kind of hung around after they went to lunch or snuck back in the room or whatever, took Brad's laptop, went out a window and on a roof, and ended up like leaking and releasing all this stuff. It was like the worst thing that could have ever happened to Brad. It's amazing he's still, able to do these seminars at this point because, of course, he has the permission of the estate to share these, exclusive videos and to play unreleased songs and things like that with the understanding that it will not be captured on video or recorded or anything like that. Well, it didn't work out because so much of that stuff has now leaked out, including this video that inspired me to get on here and talk. And it's this video of Michael, and Brad is in there too, and maybe Matt Forger, and Bruce Swedien, who of course is one of the engineers and producers on the Dangerous record. And they're sitting around in Studio B, I think, of Record 1, the studio that I worked at, trying to decide which songs are going to be on Dangerous. They have file cards and they're moving them around in different orders. And, they still were thinking about records. So what's side A, what's side B? How are we going to sequence, these two collections of music, basically? And, of course, now there's no side A, no side B, no nothing. It's just streaming and whatever. But back then they still were thinking, we need a cohesive side A And then, what's side B going to be? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be different? All that kind of stuff. So they went through, like I said, many twists and turns to get to the point where they finally decided, or had to make a decision as far as what songs are going to be on Dangerous. Anyway, so this video that leaked out, I kind of agonized myself over should I add a clip of this video into here, but I really don't want to take any of Brad's stuff. I don't want to add to the fact that his song, his content has been stolen, these songs have been taken, these videos, have been spread out all over YouTube. So I'm not going to do it, but you can take a look if you want. And about halfway in this video, when they're trying to select songs for Dangerous, there is this one part that, I made a little clip of. I have it from my own personal archive because it really sums up what it was like working on Dangerous. It's the engineer, Bruce Woodine, and it's Michael in there, and it's a loose, casual conversation, but Bruce is basically saying, look, we can't fit all these songs on the record. There are two things that are going to happen, either deletion or editing. We're going to just cut a song altogether, or maybe two songs, or we're going to edit a large group of these songs down from 6 minutes to 5 minutes, or 8 minutes to 6 minutes, or we're going to have to, compress all these songs and make them shorter because there's no way it's all going to fit on one CD. So Bruce is discussing that with him, and you hear Michael under his breath, just, barely above a whisper saying, editing, So if he has a choice between deletion or editing, he doesn't want to get rid of any song that he's working on. He'd rather edit them all a little shorter or whatever so that they're all still included. It really was, just a fascinating insight. Basically, when you look at Dangerous, it's the first project that Michael was in charge of. Of course, Quincy Jones did the previous records, and when Quincy was around, Quincy said, hey, this song's going to be on there. This song's going to be on there. I don't think this one's going to make the cut. We'll put this one on there. Michael had someone making those decisions for him, and he just trusted Quincy and went with it. When it was Michael's job to decide what songs went on there, he was pulled in so many different directions. He never wanted to insult anyone, hurt anyone's feelings. He knew how important it was to get, songs on Dangerous. It meant a lot of money for the people involved. And so he just was afraid, even though he was Michael Jackson and rich and powerful, to, hurt anyone's feelings or make anyone, annoyed or disappointed with him. I have told the story before about how he left a note for me on my desk once saying, Robbie, I took one ink pin, P-I-N. He meant a pen. So he wanted me to know that he took a pen from the studio. I was nobody. I was a guy getting lunch. They could have fired me at any time and nobody would have thought twice about it. But he wanted, me to know in particular, because he put it on my desk, hey, I took a pen. Like I'd be going through all the pens and going, wait, there were 12 pens and now there are only 11. It's probably Michael. He stole a pen. Like I would care. Take all the pens. What do I care? I'm making, $5.10 an hour back then. But anyway, so Michael did not want to hurt anyone's feelings. There were multiple groups of people. There were a lot of politics, and I've talked specifically about that. But for this video, the purposes of what I'm trying to say here, basically, there were 3 groups of people generating songs at the point where they had, way more songs than they even needed. They had a meeting with the executives from Sony. Let me push this button here. And they had a meeting with the executives from Sony to show them basically, the outline of how they thought the Dangerous record would sound, what songs would be included on there. And so they edited together all these songs. They made like a mixtape. They played it for these Sony execs at our studio. This maybe was a year into the project. And they had probably, an hour and 40 minutes of music, maybe 100 minutes of music or something. There was no way all that stuff was going to fit on a CD. The studio execs knew it, all the engineers and the people working at the studio knew it, but Michael just refused to make these decisions and to, definitively say, all right, this song's going to be on there. This one's just not going to make it. So while he was struggling with all that, one of the original production teams dropped out. And then Teddy Riley came into the picture, and now Teddy Riley is starting to work on these songs. So now there's even more songs. So it just, was just something he really just, struggled with throughout the entire project to decide what is Dangerous going to be? What is it going to sound like? Is it going to be futuristic? Is it going to be, more of the Michael we know and love? Is it going to be, retro? more R&B stuff we would have maybe heard, a couple albums back or whatever. I mean, he just, like I said, literally agonized over these decisions. And it was a very difficult situation for him during the making of Dangerous to be in the position of being the person who had to decide this, because he put his heart and soul into these songs. He worked on them for hundreds of hours. The last thing he wanted to do was work on a song for 3 months or whatever, and then leave it on the cutting room floor. So it was a very tough time for Michael, and eventually, I mean, there was not unlimited money. I mean, I don't know what they spent, $5 million or something making Dangerous, but the money was running out at some point, and Sony put some pressure on him to the point where, his managers were showing up. That was a guy named Sandy Gallen. Other people were just trying to give him guidance and help and whatever. Like I said, he was being pulled in all these different directions, but eventually, they had to just make the decision and put the record out. I've said this before about Dangerous. It's a very uneven record. There really is a side A and a side B. Side A is mostly Teddy Riley. It is New Jack Swing, industrial sounding, supposedly futuristic music. I'm not a fan of some of Teddy's songs. Some of them I like a lot. The second side was the more orchestral stuff, the choruses, the kids singing, the big giant, hi-fi productions that Bruce Swedien and Bill Bottrell were working on. So the album really is kind of lopsided, unbalanced in my opinion. Half of it sounds like this, half of it sounds like something else. And like I said, they just had to make a decision and pull the plug at some point, and that's what happened. In November 91, when the album finally came out, they had just had enough and said, all right, we're sequencing this thing, putting it together. We're going to figure out what's on here. We're going to cram whatever we can onto one CD, and that's it. And so I think the final running time of Dangerous is 78 minutes. Typical CDs could only hold 72, or I've seen 74 minutes. I think that length was decided because that was Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or something. It was one of the first CDs released. They wanted to make sure they could fit it all on one CD. Anyway, somehow they even crammed 4 extra minutes onto Dangerous. It's the longest single CD I think I own, or one of them. So I don't even know how they did it, but somehow they, got a few more little, zeros and ones onto that record. And I think Dangerous is 14 songs, I think. But I should look this stuff up before I make videos. But anyway, it had to be decided. Finally, it was decided, but Michael really had a tough time. He would rather cut the length of, multiple songs down rather than, have to leave one behind. It's when you're in Vietnam and you're leading your platoon, leave no soldier behind. He didn't want to leave any song behind he was working on, but, it just was going to, come down to the physical limits of the length of the CD. The first production team he worked with was a producer named Brian Loren and an engineer named Richard Cottrell. They were generating multiple songs, and sadly, none of those ended up on the record, and maybe that's a good thing because then there were just less songs to choose from. But I talked in another video today about songs that he was working on with this producer, Brian Loren. Brian Loren tried to auction them off this week or recently and didn't have any success in that. So you can check out that video. That's a whole different topic. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for watching. And it was, fascinating to be around then. There was so much money and there were just so much creativity happening back then. Michael just wanted to keep the party going. He didn't want to ever stop making songs, and he certainly did not want to decide what songs, finally ended up on Dangerous. But somebody had to make that decision or, encourage him at least to decide. And it was finally done after a couple of years. The album came out, and it is what it is. It's how it ended up. I think Dangerous could have been a much different album if it had been released a year earlier. It probably would be a much different album if it was released a year later. There was just so many variables and so many different songs. But it is what it is, and that's what we got. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Bye.